For my first video in this Neon Genesis Evangelion episode-by-episode analysis series, we talked about how Misato was masterfully characterized in episode 1. And from the title, you can probably tell that we aren't abandoning ship for Shinji quite yet. As in this video for episode 2 of Neon Genesis Evangelion, we will again be talking somewhat about characterization regarding Misato, but more in a thematic sense while also talking about her somewhat best friend Ritsuko, who I'm learning is one of the most underrated characters in the series. In this video, I want to talk about how these two characters are diametrically opposed thematically, and why that's not only great characterization for both of them, but why it makes their somewhat friendship so interesting when they interact. As Ritsuko is representative thematically of science and raw data, she's unfeeling, grounded, and impartial, and Misato is representative of emotion and feeling as she is reactionary, inconsistent, torn, and loving. These thematic beats are hit on with these characters in every scene they appear in this episode. And that's what we are going to be going over today in another attempt to demonstrate why this show stands above all others. We open episode 2 continuing off episode 1, as the first episode ended right as the fight between Shinji inside AV Unit 1 and the first angel was about to begin. But this episode is structured in a manner that some of the fight is at the beginning of the episode, then we flash forward to after the fight for most of the episode, only to then return to the action at the end of the episode. This structure doesn't seem revolutionary now, but many pieces have been written and videos have been made about how clever structurally this episode is. And it is something I'm only giving a passive mention to here. You can seek other material to explain why this works so well, but again, this series isn't an all-encompassing analysis of everything that is great about this series. Each individual video is usually only about one detail from an episode, big or small, but rest assured, everything is great in Evangelion. Always remember that nearly everything in Evangelion has as much thought put into it and depth as the elements I explore in these videos, and there's probably more to discover in the dense minutes and seconds of each episode that I still haven't noticed. But nonetheless, while the fight is going on, Misato is commanding Shinji, and Ritsuko, as she usually will be, is at Misato's side controlling the technological front of the battle. They are both used from a narrative standpoint to give textual and emotional exposition while the fight goes on here, as Gendo acts as the overseeing authority figure and Shinji operates as the audience surrogate, not knowing what's going on. But the thematic characterization this video is all about starts through the exposition both of these characters give as the fight is going on. As I mentioned, both textual and emotional exposition is used here. Ritsuko here, embodying science, instructs Shinji to do things like attempt to walk in the Ava, and is excited when he moves successfully in it initially. Misato remains firm with Shinji, acting more as a commander than a mother, but doesn't give instructions about things like movement in the Ava, and instead takes more of a moral coaching role, embodying the more emotional side of this situation, while Ritsuko continues to only give practical advice. Another characterizing element that features throughout the episode and initially is brought up here is that Ritsuko is far quicker to give up than Misato, whose demeanor is overall more optimistic. But basically, Ritsuko is used to give textual exposition about the fight scene, to give general information to the audience about the mechanics of the Evangelion and the angels and nerves' general technology, while Misato is used to give emotional exposition about what Shinji must be feeling in the moment and why that's important to the mission. This theme continues throughout the episode, where Ritsuko is concerned with measurable scientific analysis of the situation, and Misato is concerned with the emotional analysis of the situation. In a lesser show, they would have just used both characters to mindlessly dump exposition onto the audience in an annoying and insulting way, but here in Evangelion, more thought has been put into the type of exposition that's necessary to give to the audience, and which characters thematically it's more appropriate to deliver certain pieces of exposition. So the exposition doubles as both characterization and theming. Pretty clever. In the scene after we cut away from the battle and after catching up with Shinji in the hospital, Misato and Ritsuko are together again on the front lines cleaning up after the battle. This is something that happens a lot in Evangelion. The series has put a lot of thought into how these massive giant robot battles would work in reality, as there's always scenes, usually in the following episode after an angel attack, all about cleaning up after the fight scene, or removing the angel's body, or fixing the city, or redrawing the map of the city, or something. And this shows the attention to detail that's needed for a show to be this good. I'm pretty sure the big diamond thing from episode 5 and 6 is in the next 2 or 3 episodes slowly being deconstructed, because Evangelion has put thought into cleanup efforts and how difficult, time-consuming, and expensive those operations would be. Seilei is constantly complaining about how much money repairing the city and headquarters takes. The logistics of this situation have been thought about, and it helps to create a more understandable setting for our characters to operate in. It's these little details, man, and this is the first we see of it. But back to the point of the video, here the thematic elements of both Ritsuko and Misato are on display again, as Misato is concerned about lying to the public again as they decide to cover up the angel attack in the media, and Ritsuko is more practically happy that the PR people finally have something to do. Again, this doubles as exposition. Ritsuko also finally comes to the emotional description that everyone is scared, which Misato responds to, explaining that of course everybody is scared, because it takes longer for Ritsuko to understand the emotional impact of any given situation, whereas it's Misato's strength. Then in a ride back from the cleanup site, Misato revels in air conditioning being the best scientific advancement of mankind as Ritsuko explains that Shinji is woken up. Ritsuko seems to be satisfied just at the fact that Shinji is woken up and seems physically fine, whereas Misato is far more concerned for Shinji's emotional well-being. They even make this dichotomy more obvious when Misato verbally shows this concern and that Shinji did have a hectic day, to which Ritsuko responds saying that it isn't too surprising since his cranial nerves took a lot of strain, and Misato ignores that and says that Shinji's heart is what has been most injured, and obviously heart is a metaphor for feelings here. It's such a simple read of this situation, and the way the line is delivered in the sub does wonders for Misato's characterization. This is also mirrored in the following scene with Shinji, where he looks at his arm, which was physically in pain in the battle, because his nerves were still connected to Unit 2 when the angel snapped its arm. But Shinji doesn't reflect on the physical pain, but the mental strain and trauma that comes from being helpless and at the mercy of an alien creature. Basically, Misato understands and relates to Shinji far more than Ritsuko does. That's what's established here, which works and is important. Ritsuko and Misato then have another general conversation about whether or not they can be the angels or not, which highlights how Misato is far more optimistic than Ritsuko. Ritsuko even outrightly calls Misato an optimist here. Ritsuko also says that it gives her relief and hope to hear these optimistic ramblings from Misato. They then separate for the middle part of the episode as Misato heads to the hospital to check up on Shinji, and Ritsuko will pop back up later for a particularly interesting scene with Gendo. When Misato shows up at the hospital to pick up Shinji, they don't talk very much. Shinji is confused and scared because initially last episode Misato was nice and comforting to him, and he even related to her a little bit, but then she turned on him and sided with his father and made him pilot the Ava. We talked about the significance of the moment last episode where Shinji turned to seek comfort from Misato, but turned his head only to see a firm, unmoving commander telling him to do what had to be done. Misato has strained her relationship with Shinji, and as we know, Shinji already has a lot of trouble connecting with people. Misato hasn't decided or even thought about Shinji living with her yet, but the gears start turning in that regard when her and Shinji pass Gendo in the elevator on the way out of the hospital. This obviously means quite a bit to the Gendo and Shinji relationship, since Gendo didn't come to visit his own son in the hospital but is going to see Rei. But this video isn't about Gendo and Shinji, it's about Ritsuko and Misato. But this is Misato's first instance of seeing just how distant the father-son pairing are, and she undoubtedly relates this to her own relationship with her father and is sympathetic to Shinji here, only further endearing him to her. This is only bolstered following this when Misato finds out that Shinji and Gendo won't be living together and that Shinji will be living by himself. After hearing this, Misato decides that Shinji will live with her, which, while not only being motivated by her sympathy and wanting to help Shinji, is likely also motivated at least a little by the fact that she's lonely. She doesn't want to turn into Ritsuko, the crazy cat lady, since she's already halfway there living alone with a pet. It's just that her pet is a cool, warm water penguin, and Ritsuko doesn't actually have a cat. Shinji is neutral on the decision to live with Misato and therefore agrees. Misato and Ritsuko reunite in the episode then as Misato calls her to tell her the news. Ritsuko thinks she's crazy as this is a big step, as Misato will basically be becoming Shinji's mother moving forward. Misato then makes a joke about not trying to sleep with Shinji that doesn't age well and freaks Ritsuko out, which is massively ironic since Ritsuko is already sleeping with an Akari herself, and is freaking out about even the mention of a potential relationship there when it's the exact same relationship her and Gendo have, just Ritsuko is the Shinji and Gendo is the Misato. Misato then tries a bunch of ways to strengthen her relationship with Shinji as she takes him shopping and to her favorite place in the city where you can oversee the entire city on a hillside. This also doubles as Misato trying to demonstrate, especially in the scene on the hill, that Shinji saved everything and everybody in the city last night when defeating the angel, but both messages don't entirely ingrain themselves in Shinji. They then make it home and Misato is trying to be as inviting as possible, especially in the now iconic scene where Misato makes Shinji repeat the line that he's home now. Misato, as I mentioned in the last video, is then characterized as a slob and an alcoholic bachelor here. We see her nutritional choices and how messy her apartment is as corroboration. Misato gets drunk for the first time here and tries to endear Shinji to his new environment by teasing him, but he's not the most receptive to it, and it seems like he just thinks Misato is being mean to him, but understands that she isn't being cruel. Shinji is also a total pushover and will apologize for anything if he thinks it'll get him out of a situation. This is brought up quite a bit throughout the overall series, but is first demonstrated here. There's a comedic segment where they divvy up the chores, and Shinji gets fucked over, but it shows that Shinji has some responsibilities even at home, and that this isn't an entirely free ride he's getting from Misato. But overall, we see a very different homey side of Misato here, as she gets drunk, has fun, and lets her guard down, which is something we basically never see from Ritsuko. Even when Ritsuko comes over to celebrate or something, she doesn't seem very relaxed or vulnerable in this type of situation. Misato then tells Shinji to have a bath, which leads to the brilliant comedic introduction of Pen Pen that also features as a clever subversive can in front of Shinji's penis gag, with the toothpicks. But the actual bath scenes here are paralleled because Shinji has a depressive and reflective moment in the bath, as does Misato later on. Shinji has the particularly depressive and clever "bad memories always find me in the bath" line that I thought was worth a mention. Also, now that we are mentioning the Misato bath scene, there is an abundance of sexualized Misato shots in this episode. The bath scene is a big one, but there's a bunch of situational shots during the episode as well, mostly when she's dressed down at home relaxing, which does come as a shock from Shinji's perspective. I gather when you're a young man living with someone you're sexually interested/involved with, you realize that they will be walking around the house half naked some of the time, and it's quite a shock, and a little bit exciting. It's something Shinji will get used to, and as I pointed out last time, seeing Misato as a sexual being is very important to her characterization and how the audience views her. I also found the animation of Misato getting dressed oddly and specifically detailed. We then get the Ritsuko and Gendo scene where they talk about some plot stuff, and this scene is made rich in retrospect. With only the context of the first 2 episodes, this scene just seems like exposition, with not much characterization, which is weird because Evangelion has been perfect this far with having all exposition also doubling as characterization, but you'd be a fool to underestimate this series, as with the context of the entire series and upon a rewatch, this scene is monumentally great characterization and maybe my favorite scene in the episode. Like most things in Eva, the second time through, this scene gets even better. Ritsuko and Gendo are sleeping together at this point, and knowing that and how their relationship turns out, this scene is made almost tragic. There is no sense of affection in this scene at all. This scene comes across as a boss talking to his subordinate, when in actuality it's supposed to be a private work-related conversation from lover to lover. And this lack of affection is inherent in Gendo's character in retrospect, because as we learn at the very end of the series in End of Evangelion, he forced himself to not get attached to anyone in fear of losing them, like what happened with Yui. So he intentionally has no intent to care for Ritsuko at all, but she just wants validation from someone and she never gets it. It's pretty clever. Gendo and Ritsuko's relationship is fascinating, and it's made even more tragic by the fact that Ritsuko's mother made the exact same mistake as she did with the same man, and also remained unloved until he was done using her for her technological abilities and then died. Ritsuko is a tragic character because of this, especially when you factor in that she had to watch Misato and Kaji have an actual loving relationship as equals, while she was stuck working for and fucking Gendo in the hopes of impressing him, which she never did, as he seemingly never shows any thankfulness or gratitude or love to her. And this scene is the first demonstration of that struggle in Ritsuko, and is likely indicative of why she still only understands the world through a scientific lens and has trouble understanding how Misato understands emotion, because she's never been loved whereas Misato has. This scene itself also functions as a parallel to the scene with Shinji and Misato beforehand, as both girls struggle to understand the Ikari boys and both try to fill the hole that Yui has left in them. It's very clever, and the ghost of Yui haunts nearly everything in Evangelion. Also, emotionally, the scenes parallel and juxtapose each other, as the budding relationship seems to be going a lot more smoothly and the two participants seem to care a lot more about each other than the one that's assumingly been going on for years at this point. Ritsuko is a tragic, great character, and we'll see this explored in more depth as we continue. We then get another phone call between Ritsuko and Misato while Misato is in the bath, where Misato talks about the strain everything that's happened has taken on Shinji. Ritsuko explains that maintaining Shinji as a pilot is part of Misato's job, and when Misato talks about how living and taking care of Shinji is quite a bit of work, Ritsuko tries to throw it back in her face, and Misato gets pissed off, tells her to shut up, and hangs up. What is being portrayed here is that Misato was starting to have doubts in Shinji and her optimistic attitude, as it looked like Shinji wasn't ever going to pilot the Evangelion ever again, but when Ritsuko tried to go for the "I told you so" moment, Misato decided to double down on her outlook, to spite Ritsuko. This also shows a failing in their friendship as Misato came to Ritsuko to vent and Ritsuko just pissed her off and tries to dunk on her with an "I told you so." But the biggest takeaway from this encounter is that Misato fully believes in Shinji again. We then get a moment of redemption for Misato as she reflects on how she treated Shinji at the end of episode 1, and how she was just as bad as Ritsuko for trying to use Shinji as a tool to get what she wants. So Misato basically redeems herself for the only conceivably bad thing and unkind thing she has done thus far in the series. The show is doubling down on portraying Misato as the nicest and kindest person possible through this introspection. Misato concludes that because of how she treated Shinji to destroy the angel, she can't be happy that they destroyed the angel, when as we know because of context later on, Misato should be reveling in her revenge after killing her first angel here. But what's being said here, and what is another theme of the episode, is that no one is happy that the angel was defeated and no one is celebrating. This is because they are starting to realize that their issues aren't immediately fixed through defeating the angels, as they are more personal. This thematically will play into grander things later on. This is how the episode transitions back into the fight scene and shows how the angel was defeated after showing the ramifications of it being defeated all episode. Misato during the fight constantly is concerned with how Shinji is doing, while Ritsuko is more worried about the mission and the health of the Evangelion. Ritsuko is thinking bigger picture while Misato is more concerned about people. Misato even commands Shinji's safety be top priority of the mission, showing again the dichotomy between the two characters. Misato also emotionally reacts as Unit 1 goes berserk, whereas Ritsuko, knowing more about the situation, is trying to figure out if the Ava has gone berserk. They are both still being used for exposition in the same way they were at the beginning of the episode here as well. And then everything comes together at the end of the episode where Ritsuko and Misato come together as they both finish each other's final expositional sentence about this being the Ava's true form in mutual confusion and mutual fear, which calls back to the scene earlier in the episode that chronologically happens after this where they discussed being scared about everything that's going on. Both science and emotion, Ritsuko and Misato are terrified in the face of the truth of the Evangelion. Then there's a final scene where Misato tries to tell Shinji that she's proud of him as recompense for how she mistreated him last episode. Shinji is still unsure about what to think about Misato and doesn't respond. Earlier in the bath he concluded that she wasn't a bad person, but he's still cautious and not trusting of her. And that's Evangelion episode 2, or at least what's relevant to this video from episode 2. We didn't talk about Shinji in any depth in this video again, and there's some more Gendo analysis that could have been done through the episode. Remember, these videos are usually only about a single element from an episode, and there's still always more to talk about regarding each episode of Evangelion. In this video, we just decided to talk about how Nerve has a representation of science and a representation of emotion in its two main girls, and how the series and the organization couldn't function without both of them. Look forward to episode 3, support links in the description below. Thanks.